Hello PICA fans, my name is Bob and Fishy, and welcome back to the playoffs. Today we're going to be looking at a battle between RedMat80 and the Toronto Tyrantrums versus Robotnik is Sexy and the Sequim Malamars. So, we know that RedMat80 just took over coaching duties not too long ago, so he's still kind of finding his groove as the coach of his team. However, he 6-0'd the Denver Dashers in the first round of the playoffs. This guy is a huge threat, but on the opposite side of that coin, Robotnik is Sexy finished the season with the best overall record. Now, he did have a bit of hacks in some of his games, but at the same time, he's played incredibly well. This is actually probably going to be one of the best battles. It's a battle between two of the most dangerous teams in the playoffs, just looking at it. So let's go ahead and check these teams out. So, RedMat80 brought a very different team than we saw this first round. We've got Tyrantrum, Victini, Clefable. Over here we've got the, Scizor, of course, Slowking, and Mandibuzz. So, what does that tell us? Well, of course, Scizor is going to be a physical attacker, potentially a support set, but we do also have the Mandibuzz here that could be a support guy, so either of these guys can be running Defog. If I'm looking at it, I'd probably assume that Mandibuzz is. That's one of the moves he's best at carrying. That, Foul Play, Toxic, maybe some Taunt if he feels like going that route, and of course Roost. Then of course we've got Slowking right here. Now Slowking obviously has very good special attack and very good special defense. Coupled with the Regenerator ability, this thing's going to be a very good bulky attacker, or potentially just special wall. Next up we got Scizor. Now Scizor can be Mega Scizor, that is an option that Matt has. Of course it can run a very effective Swords Dance set. Could potentially, if you want to run just regular Scizor, you can run Banded. Bullet Punch, obviously going to have a lot of utility just because of that Technician boost. Stab Steel is pretty good, so that's going to be a really good option for him. And of course it does have access to U-Turn, which is a very good move just generally speaking. Next up, we've got a Clefable. Now, Clefable, we've seen it before. It can have a couple of different abilities. It can have either Unaware or Magic Guard. Both of those are really good for different purposes. Unaware is just going to allow you to beat setup sweepers one-on-one. And of course, Magic Guard is going to allow you to switch in, not take that rocks damage, not take any sort of status damage. And if you want to run a Life Orb, you can run a Life Orb on him. Won't take any damage from that either. Of course, you can couple that with maybe a Calm Mindset or something, and you're able to really boost up your stats a lot. So, that's a really good option. Then, of course, we've got Victini here. Now, last time we saw Matt bring a physically defensive Victini. That was a really interesting selection, but it really helped him. We saw like a lot of key Will-O-Wisps and just some nice, really nice bulk actually. Just being able to come in, take on Mega Lopunny from the Denver Dashers just one-on-one and just beat it, or scare it out more or less. But of course, can't underestimate the amount of threat that comes with a physically offensive set, be that Bandit or Scarfed or Life Orb if you want to go that route, just being able to switch your moves. Of course, V-Create is obviously going to be the kind of go-to move in that scenario. But of course, there's also a nice spec set that you can run. Has a couple of really nice fire moves on the special side. And of course, it gets a lot of different Pokemon signature moves, which is really good for him. And of course, last up we got the mascot. We got Tyrantrum here. Now, Tyrantrum's a really interesting Pokemon just because it can run a couple of different things. I suppose that goes for pretty much everything. It can run a couple of different sets really well. Of course, Dragon Dance, having that really high base power head smash, is going to be really good. But it can also run a nice defensive set. It's obviously got very good physical defense. Couple that with the special defense on Slowking, that's a really good wall core. Now, Dragon Rock isn't the best defensive typing in the world, but at the same time, he's able to use that physical defense to take some hits that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily think he could. And of course, he can get Stealth Rocks. That's always nice if you want to be able to get some rocks up on your opponent's side of the field. If you can keep them there with some offensive pressure, you're going to be able to put yourself in a really good position to win. So, basically, Matt has a lot of stuff that could potentially fill a couple of different roles. Obviously, Clefable's probably going to be more on the defensive side, same for the Slowking and Mandibuzz. But any one of these guys could potentially be Matt's go-to sweeper, be that the Scizor, the Victini, or the Tyrantrum, he could actually run just straight up offensive on all three of them and just try to. It's almost like a pseudo double dragon type of deal where you just try to break an opponent's wall by just like repeatedly throwing a lot of the same type of attack. Just in this idea, it'd be a lot of physical attacks that will eventually just wear down the opponent's physical wall and allow you to just kind of beat them up after that. But of course, never put it past Matt to run some sort of strange sets on some of his stuff. So that's obviously still an option. Next up, we've got Robotnik, and now Robotnik has pretty much his go-to team. Like, he swapped out a couple of the guys, on and off, but this is a really good team all around. So, he's got Gastrodon, Arcanine, the Diggersby, one of his favorite guys to use, just that with a massive base attack. We got a Ferrothorn, Sylveon, and of course, Skuntank. So, what does that tell us? Well, of course, Gastrodon's going to be probably a specially defensive guy. Obviously, going to have that grass weakness, but that's not really an issue looking at this team unless Victini decides to throw an Energy Ball, which it very well could. It's got good mixed attacking sets. But generally speaking, Gastrodon's going to be able to take a lot of hits from a lot of this stuff. Scizor and Tyrantrum not really going to be able to do a ton now. Tyrantrum can still hit dragon moves, and Scizor can still hit bug moves. But yeah, they're really not going to do a ton. So Gastrodon's going to be a pretty good especially defensive wall. Next up, we've got Arcanine. Now, Arcanine, if you're looking at what Matt could potentially bring, Arcanine's probably going to be a physical defense, or like physically defensive Pokemon, just because Matt has access to Heracross and Victini, and Scizor as some of his key offensive Pokemon. Arcanine's really going to be able to take a lot of their attacks, pretty much all of their stab moves, I think, except for maybe a Heracross close combat. But even then, it's not going to do, with Intimidate, it's going to have that damage reduced. Obviously going to be able to throw some Wisps around. So not really, not trying to overpredict just off of team preview, but obviously Arcanine matches up pretty well against Matt's usual offensive Pokemon. Now, of course, we do have the Tyrantrum here, so that could be a threat. But, of course, Gastrodon can kind of deal with that, and so can Ferrothorn here. So, next up, we've got the Diggersby. Now, Diggersby obviously is going to be a physical attacking Pokemon. It can run either Banded, Scarf, Life Orb, Sash, if you want to do that. It can run Sword Stance with, Quick Attack. Basically, this thing has a million different options, especially when you consider that a lot of its offensive moves boil down to the same, 3 or 4 attacks. A lot of Earthquakes, a lot of Returns, some U-turns, some Quick Attacks. Basically, those are going to be your offensive moves on a Diggersby, but you'd actually be surprised at how versatile the thing can be, just in terms of, different stat spreads and stuff. Next up, we've got the Ferrothorn. Obviously, that's going to be really clutch in dealing with stuff like Tyrantrum, potentially even the Mandibuzz, if it doesn't have any sort of sub or anything. Just getting those Leech Seeds on it could potentially be really helpful. Scizor, not really going to be able to deal with it super handily. Obviously, it can throw a nice superpower or something, but if it's not carrying that, obviously, it's not going to really be able to do anything to it. Of course, Slowking and Clefable can potentially be carrying fire moves, so you got to watch out for that, but at the same time, if they get hit with one of this guy's stab moves, they're really not going to be liking it. And it can also carry some Stealth Rocks if you want to go that route on Ferrothorn. Obviously, that's one of its best things that it can do. Spikes are another option. Basically, it's got a lot of defensive utility here. And obviously, a very good mixed defensive Pokemon. Just being able to have that Leftovers recovery or Rocky Helmet if you want to go that route. But being able to recover some stuff with some Leech Seeds, that's always really nice. Matt doesn't have anything that is immune to Leech Seeds, so keep that in mind. Except for Clefable if it happens to run Magic Guard. Next up, we've got Sylveon. Now, Robotnik has pretty much run the same Sylveon set. It's been very defensive with Wish and Baton Pass and Protect and Hyper Voice. That's really been his way to his best. He's brought that to most of his games, I'll say. Obviously, it's a really good Pokemon just in terms of being able to keep those defenses up and keep your party healthy. Obviously, if you're going to run stuff like Diggersby and Ferrothorn, Wish support is really handy. And Baton Pass, he's able to predict really well with that and just kind of know when to switch out and stuff. He's been actually having a lot of utility out of that, so Sylveon, probably not going to be an offensive threat like it can be if you throw like a Choice Specs or something on it, but obviously going to be really, really good in terms of just a defensive presence. And that brings us to Skuntank. Now, this thing could potentially be pretty much anything. It can run a defensive set or an offensive set. Sucker Punch has a lot of utility, so does Pursuit, so does Knockoff, basically a lot of those dark moves. But it can also be carrying some nice poison moves if you want to go that route. And if you look at that, it's going to hit the walls on Matt's team really well. Slowking, obviously not really going to want to take a Knockoff or Pursuit or anything. And Clefable, obviously if it gets hit with a Gunk Shot, not going to be feeling too good. So, obviously if Tyrantrum, Victini, or even, well, Scizor doesn't really want to come in on it just because it doesn't resist the dark moves anymore this gen. But a lot of the other stuff, like, it can kind of threaten it out if it gets in. But at the same time, if this thing can come in on one of your walls and, like, you know, just use one of those utility moves that's able to just, has a nice secondary effect and can just kind of put some offensive pressure on Matt, that's going to be pretty much why he brought it. So, that's kind of my analysis for that. Looking at Robotnik's team, very defensive with Diggersby to just throw some powerful attacks. But Robotnik is definitely going to look to win some grind games rather than just over-the-top attacking presence, which you're going to see from Matt. So, I think that's going to be the key to victory. You'll see a lot of physical attackers in this game. So, keep that in mind as we're going forward. PICA has a lot of very potent physical attackers. Anyways, let's go ahead and start the game. So Robotnik's going to lead with his Skuntank. Figured he'd probably want to get that out of the way right off the bat. Now Matt's going to pick Victini as his lead. Usually a pretty good lead, but Sucker Punch is going to be an option on that Skuntank. He's going to go for the Sucker Punch there, as Victini goes for the Blue Flare. Scores a crit, and that's actually going to show us that this thing is special, which is interesting. Unfortunately for Matt, Victini has just died. So Skuntank down to 3%, but at the same time, took out one of Matt's best offensive Pokemon. Now Scizor's going to want to come in here, and I'm not sure if Skuntank is able to carry fire moves, but it obviously doesn't want to go for one right here. Scizor's probably going to go for some sort of setup move here. That's probably what Robotnik is thinking. Or even if he doesn't, Arcanine's just a really good switch all around. Obviously a U-turn would have given Matt some offensive momentum. However, if he goes for anything else, Robotnik's going to have the initiative right there. So, Matt obviously doesn't want to stick around with his Scizor against an Arcanine. Slowking is going to be a really good option just to be able to soak up any sort of hits, even if they're physical hits from an Arcanine, something like a Wild Charge or whatever. Slowking's going to be able to take that. So he comes in, gets burned, but that's okay. Obviously, Slowking's going to have that regenerator ability and just be able to switch out, get a lot of health back. That's always a really nice thing. Now, Matt's going to make a really aggressive double switch here into Tyrantrum. Unfortunately, doesn't really work out for him. I'm not sure what he thought would be coming in here, but Sylveon was probably the last thing he wanted to see. Obviously, Sylveon is going to be in here. Goes for the Baton Pass. Now, he could have just gone for Hyper Voice. That would have been a safe play. However, the Baton Pass is a really good way to keep that offensive momentum on your side. Skuntank's going to come in, and he's going to be immediately able to threaten out that Clefable with a Poison Jab. Now, Mandibuzz does get poisoned here, which is a little bit unfortunate. I'm not sure if Matt... I don't think he has anything that can heal Bell other than Clefable. And if that Clefable is like a, like a Calm Mindset or anything, obviously not going to be carrying that. So, in comes Sylveon against Mandibuzz. That's usually a really good option. Mandibuzz isn't going to be able to do a lot with those dark moves. He goes for the knockoff here, which is going to take away Sylveon's leftovers, but that's not really a huge problem for Sylveon. Being able to wish, that's always really good. So, in comes the Clefable. That's probably going to be one of... Like, Matt seems to be content to go into his walls against the Sylveon. Unfortunately for him, Robotnik is able to predict that really well, brings in the Skuntank, and he's going to be able to throw another move at Matt. Obviously, Matt's going to have to make some sort of switch. In comes the Scizor, as the Poison Jab doesn't do anything, obviously. But Poison Jab was a safe move there. He could have gone for like a, maybe, I don't know what else he has, maybe like knockoff or something. But Poison Jab is probably the safest. Even if Scizor comes in, Arcanine is a perfect switch in for that. Unfortunately, Matt, he saw what happened last time. He's going to go for the U-turn here. Try to keep that offensive momentum on his side. In comes the Tyrantrum. Now, that's going to be really threatening for the Arcanine. Arcanine does have a lot of physical defense, but Tyrantrum is going to be able to throw that stab head smash at it if it wants. Now, of course, this is going to give Tyrantrum a setup opportunity if it decides to have Dragonets or anything, and you see it does. So Gastrodon's going to come in, and he's actually probably not going to do super well against a Dragon Claw. However, Matt does not want to risk his probably his best offensive Pokemon right now. Obviously, Scizor can do certain things that Tyrantrum can't, but at the same time, Tyrantrum not really, he's going to be kind of good against anything that Robotnik has once he gets a couple of DDs up. So Matt not going to want to risk that too early. Now, Arcanite's going to come on in as Clefable goes for the Heal Bell. That's going to show us that it's probably not a Calm Mind Clefable or anything. So that's interesting information. Got to keep that in mind. Now, Arcanine got the Intimidate off on it. That's not really going to do anything. So, in comes Slowking, obviously toxic free now. Or, sorry, it was just regular. Or, was it burned? Yeah, I think it was burned. Slowking was burned before. Ends up getting burned again, unfortunately, for Slowking. Obviously, that Heal Bell kind of went for nothing. But at the same time, it did, get him... Well, not really. It didn't do much for him. Anyway, Slowking's going to go for a nice Ice Beam here. Scores a crit on Gastrodon. Still didn't do a ton. Obviously, Gastrodon's probably going to have the recover. So that's probably not a huge issue. Of course, it could have potentially frozen, but, you know. Anyway, Ice Beam, Clefable's going to come in and try to deal with Gastrodon. Robotnik's going to make a nice double switch with his Gastrodon. Goes right out into the Ferrothorn. Now, we're going to find out whether this is going to kind of find out whether Clefable is carrying a Fire move. And you see, it does carry the Fire Blast. Unfortunately, not quite enough to KO the Ferrothorn. Now, obviously, Ferrothorn does have a lot of defense. So, and he's going to get those Stealth Rocks up. Now, obviously, Robot does still have some stuff that could switch into a Fire Blast. Most notably Arcanine, but also Sylveon doesn't really care. Gastrodon doesn't really care. So he's going to see the Sylveon come on in. Now, Sylveon probably going to want to go ahead and set up a nice Wish. Pass that on over to Ferrothorn. But first he goes for a Hyper Voice. Maybe he's predicting a switch or something. I'm not really sure. But obviously, he's going to be able to Wish if it wants to. And get Ferrothorn back to pretty much full health, I think. Almost. I think he'd be at about 80%. So, you know, that would be a really good option for him right there. So, let's see what Sylveon does here. He goes for a nice Wish, and obviously that's going to give him a couple of different options. He could have protected there, but he's just instead going to go ahead and go right into Ferrothorn. Scissor's not really going to be able to do a ton to it unless it has the superpower. Of course, Matt's going to predict that. He saw that, you know, Ferrothorn was at a very low amount of health. So he's just going to say, you know what? I know what you're thinking here. I'm going to go for the superpower. So we've seen a number of really good predictions, in my opinion. So in comes the Diggersby, the first time we've seen Diggersby in this match. He's going to go ahead and try to throw an attack his opponent's way. Probably, knowing Robotnik, it's probably a U-turn. Now he goes for the return there. Actually, he's going to go ahead and KO the Mandibuzz. That's really, really good for him. Able to knock out one of Matt's best defensive Pokemon. He's already knocked out the offensive, Matt's best special attacker there. So now that Mandibuzz is down, that's, you know, probably one of his best all-around defensive guys. If he's able to potentially, like, knock out that Clefable in some way, he's pretty much golden. So in comes Scizor, and I think that was just an over-prediction on Matt's part. He didn't think that Arcanine would go for a Flare Blitz there, because the Slowking almost always comes into that. And that's just going to result in a dead Scizor, which is super unfortunate. But at the same time, you know, if you overpredict, sometimes it just happens. But it was a huge overprediction on Matt's part. The Tyrantrum goes for an Outrage as soon as it switches in. That's actually probably not a good move. He probably should have gone for the DD first, because he did have that Lumberry to heal the burn. So, well, actually, I'm not really sure how much an Outrage would have done to an Arcanine at +1. Probably somewhere in the realm of 75%, so we probably would have still lived. Anyway, we see the Head Smash miss on Sylveon there, which is, you know, amazingly unfortunate. Obviously, Robotnik has kind of lucked out with the overprediction on Matt's part, and now just a Head Smash miss just to rub some salt in the wounds. Sylveon's going to come in, Baton Pass, because that's what it does, and Slowking obviously going to be kind of left here. Kind of revealed what it's going to do. Goes for a Nasty Plot. That's really interesting for a Slowking, but obviously that's going to make it pretty susceptible to just any sort of chip damage. You see, Ice Beam does a lot, but at the same time, we've seen Gastrodon eat up a crit from Slowking before and be able to just, not really care. Now, obviously, you can still stay in on this and just get a free switch into something else. Obviously, the Skunk Tank still waiting in reserve if it needs to come in because Matt never actually got Stealth Rocks up. So, yeah, that kind of hurt him there because Robotnik can pretty much he's been able to switch in the Skunk Tank for free every time. So he goes for the crunch here. Obviously, that's going to take down the Slowking. I think this thing is banded actually. So interesting to note. And last but not least, in comes the Clefable. Obviously, Robotnik's not going to want to stick around if this thing is... Oh, it's not banded. Sorry. Okay, so Skunk Tank's going to finish everything up with the Poison Jab there. Sorry, what am I thinking of? I know Robotnik has used a banded Skunk Tank before. Anyway, that's going to be a nice 4-0 for Robotnik is Sexy. He's going to be going to the finals to face Science Guy Josh. That should be a really, really interesting battle. It was the two best teams throughout the regular season. It's really nice to see them both make it to the finals and just be able to kind of have the clash of the titans, if you will. Now, of course, Robotnik did win his match against Science Guy Josh in the regular season, so we'll see if Josh is able to, avenge that or if Robotnik just has his number. But that's a topic for another video. I will see you next time, guys. My name is Bob and Fishy, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Later!